Reaction to, alright again, another reaction, I'm reacting to What If Dooku Trained Plo Koon? This is from PPSW, and the channel is right here. You want to check out the original channel and watch it for yourself. The channel will be in the description below, as always. So if you like these reaction videos, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to see more of these reaction videos in the future. Let's get started, shall we?
Hello. Our story begins inside the Grand Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The era of the High Republic may have only just ended, but the current state of affairs showed nothing but prosperity. The Republic was thriving and the Jedi Order even more so. Perhaps they had less outposts and they were no longer on the front lines of the galaxy. Maybe they didn't wear golden robes anymore, but they were still the great Jedi Order. They had a place of pilgrimage atop the galaxy on the pristine world of Coruscant. Inside the courtyard of the Jedi Temple, out by the garden, Grandmaster Yoda and his student Dooku were finishing up yet another lesson. Dooku was such an eager young mind. He was smiling and he was showing off how excited he was to be around his master. Yoda was standing on a little edge so that he could be a little closer to eye sight, especially considering Dooku was tall enough to pass for a Wookiee, as Yoda liked to joke. The two of them had just returned from a mission to Kashyyyk, one of which Dooku watched his master take on the giant Terentatek. The young Jedi liked to think about telling all of his friends about that occasion, even a little ahead of himself with this one, but the thought of telling a future pupil would be such a pleasant thought. Dooku adored his master, and the feelings were mutual from Yoda. This was Grandmaster Yoda's final student, though there was hope from Yoda. He had seen every single one of his students die during his lifetime. Nothing malicious, just the natural passing of time. Yoda was hopeful that Dooku would become Grand Master, or at the very least a council member before he died. The young Jedi was eagerly awaiting his next instruction. Yoda freely walked about, not using a cane yet, as he told his student that the day would soon be upon them. Dooku asked what this meant, and his master informed him with a jubilant smile that soon he would be a Jedi Knight. Dooku was surprised. The year was 82 BBY, and Dooku had only just a couple weeks beforehand turned 20 years old. He asked his master if he truly believed he was ready, and Yoda smiled with a chuckle, suggesting that he would have been ready before he was 17, youngest Jedi Knight in the history of their order. Yoda liked to joke with his student, but there was no hiding the fact that Dooku was Yoda's pride. He was the greatest student he ever taught. That wasn't against any of his previous students, but Dooku was a special Jedi. He was gifted with the Force. His mind was eager and open, not to mention he was a generational duelist, though as Yoda and the Order always preached, a Jedi weapon does not make a Jedi. Dooku was a little anxious about the thought of becoming a knight, but if Yoda believed he was ready, then perhaps he was. Dooku then thought of his friend Sifo Dyas. Surely he'd be jealous that Dooku was becoming a knight so young. This wasn't legitimate jealousy. It was the playful kind that existed between best friends. Dooku and Yoda began a meditation with one another. The bond between master and apprentice was never stronger. In the following days, Dooku would be knighted by the Grand Master, becoming a Jedi Knight at the age of 20. It was under Yoda's belief that Dooku would very quickly have himself a student and soon after that, become a council member. These were never things that Yoda said aloud, just hopes and beliefs for his young, former pupil. Dooku wasn't nearly as eager to begin training of another Jedi. He did seek his own version of adventure. He wanted to go out on missions and see the galaxy. However, that felt nearly impossible. The Jedi had a rule that required Jedi to leave the temple in pairs. They couldn't be alone, because that could be dangerous. This didn't bother Dooku. He knew about the rule, it having been established less than 100 years before his birth. He continued along anyways, expressing to himself that if he wanted to be a master, then maybe he should take a gander at all the students inside the youngling facilities. There were new classes being pumped out about every other month or so, and so it was very common for anyone to just pick a student whenever they needed or wanted one. The order was 10,000 large after all. There'd be plenty of students to select from, especially since most of these classes were relatively small. As Dooku moved in, he sat in on a class of Jedi younglings prepared for their final trials, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Another Keldor Jedi was about to become a Jedi Padawan. Dooku knew stories of their kind. There was an order on their home world called the Barrandau Sages. They were highly attuned to the Force, but unlike the Jedi, they considered themselves non-militaristic. Dooku adored how highly they valued their traditions and beliefs. Regardless, the Jedi frequently brought children from the Barrando sages into their order. However, a good number of these Kel Dor would grow up and decide that the Order wasn't for them, returning to their home world, surrendering their Jedi weapon and becoming Barrando sages. This particular Jedi was 10 years old, one of the better Jedi in his class. He was from a family that had other members become Jedi. There was his uncle and probably someone before that. However, the most recent, long-standing Kel Dor Jedi was Lena Kabaoyu. She had since passed away. Dooku considered the idea and honor of training one of the most reserved type of Jedi the Order could have. There were certain characteristics that came along with certain species when they became Jedi. The most common one for the Kel Dor was how reserved they were. This did worry Dooku a little, because he could be unorthodox to say the least, and he didn't want to make a young Jedi uncomfortable with such behavior. Dooku looked around and spoke to Wookiee Jedi Master Tavoka a little before the Padawans broke off and began their individual assessments. Since Dooku was selecting a student for the first time, he'd have the pick of the litter. However, Dooku wasn't even sure he would go forward with it. But Master Tavoka told Dooku that he'd regret it in the future. All he needed was 10 seconds of courage. If they don't get along, then another Jedi would take that student. If they do, Dooku would be grateful for those 10 seconds of life. 10 seconds of life that decided whether or not he'd have a lifetime bond with another Jedi. Because as it was with Yoda, the bond between master and apprentice was inseparable. Dooku inevitably took on Plo Koon as a student, just as Dooku believed it would be very challenging for him. Plo was one of the quieter kids, which Dooku was too when he was that age. Actually, come to think of it, Dooku realized that he and Plo were very similar. It wasn't until Dooku became an adult that he realized he could think for himself and use.
How ironic. The student you have is like kind of like you when you're younger. Nice.
His words. Dooku loved being a critical thinker, and he planned on instilling that into Plo. However, what Dooku looked forward to learning the most was what he could learn from his Padawan. Also, come to think of it, what happened after you select a Padawan? Dooku didn't know, so they introduced themselves and then looked at each other for a solid moment, until Dooku figured out what to do next. They started out getting to know each other, sleep schedules, and so forth. It was a lot to take in, but Dooku very quickly realized he was up for the challenge. It was especially apparent because, as Yoda's last student, he could do really anything he wanted, so instead of going about his instruction in an orthodox method, Dooku believed field work would be beneficiary for both of them. It had been a while since Dooku had been out, aside from Kashyyyk, and by the looks of things, Plo needed to get out and get some time outside the temple too. Their first missions included a bunch of random events in the undercity of Coruscant. Despite being 10 years old, Plo had a relatively deep voice, and it was mostly due to the mask. No one cared who he was till he put on the mask, so it gave him a slight edge. If they were interacting with criminals or mob members.
Really? No, not the mask. I hear that again.
Plo had a relatively deep voice, and it was mostly due to the mask. No one cared who he was till he put on the mask, so.
No! Come on now. Okay, I'm gonna continue.
It gave him a slight edge. If they were interacting with criminals or mob members, Plo came off like a mob boss, walking around with his tall security detail and talking about the scum merely adopting the light. He was born in it, molded by it. Dooku didn't really get it, but Plo took on each challenge with readiness and determination, made everything easy. But what Dooku struggled with was getting his little Kel Dor to question things. It wasn't that Plo would just do as he was told, but he was a non-confrontational individual. He would if he needed to, and sometimes he would disagree with his master, but most of the time he quietly handled things, doing the task without a peep. Sometimes it could be isolating for Dooku, but it's what he signed up for. Plo wasn't being edgy, he was just a quiet person, just as most Kel Dor are naturally. Though the young Jedi Padawan very quickly learned in the field, he took advantage of every mission, and unbeknownst to Dooku, Plo was journaling every single detail from each assignment. Plo was dedicated to his craft, and Dooku loved it. As the months went by, Dooku started amping up the challenges of each of these missions, though alongside the challenging nature of these undertakings, something came through. Dooku started to adopt a disfavor towards the direction of the Republic. As a whole, the Republic was becoming more and more corrupt. Dooku and Plo saw it as they went out to the galaxy to deal with political disputes on galactic and governmental levels. Though something that Dooku neglected to remember is that Keldor were typically natural seekers, or at least the Jedi call them seekers, which were individuals who could find Force-sensitive children relatively easily. Plo was on the path to becoming a seeker. He just had a little more to learn about his natural abilities before doing so. Though just because Keldor were naturally good seekers didn't mean they became them. It more or less meant that if they were on a mission and they felt a ripple through the Force, it was their responsibility to approach the child's family and inform them of their feelings through the Force. Due to the more unusual behavior that was becoming more apparent with Dooku, Plo found himself learning on the fly a lot of times. He actually enjoyed it, despite being the quiet individual. Plo was able to learn a lot more, simply due to having to experience it firsthand rather than read about it inside the archives. Though this did call for some unpredictable events, dangerous situations, and unhinged people. But with Dooku by his side, Plo would be safe. The reality is, Plo had massive shoes to fill, and he was aware of it. Not that his master put pressure on him, but more so, he put pressure on himself to be the best Jedi he could be. So when they were supposed to be sleeping, Plo was actively pulling information from holocrons or even meditating. He wasn't unharmonized, he was right where he needed to be. He was just pushing himself. But even though he wasn't unharmonized, he was sleep deprived, and it started to affect him, which Dooku noticed immediately. When he realized the exorbitant amount of pressure his student put onto himself, Dooku immediately pulled in the reins. He was a very loose teacher and was becoming even more so after the following days, weeks, and months with Plo Koon. Now he was going to tighten it up a little. He needed Plo to take it easy on himself. His determination was appreciated, but the time would come when everything would click for young Plo. He would understand, maybe not today or tomorrow, maybe not even a month from the moment he wished to learn it, but the day would come when he looked back with pride and appreciated the time he took to learn it. As Dooku expressed, learning wasn't a race. Everyone goes at their own speed and their own pace. Dooku's accomplishments at 20 didn't make him better than Master Yaddle for finishing her studies when she was over 80 years old, didn't make him any better than Sifo Dyas, who was still learning to be a Jedi Knight. Plo understood, and he took the new information to heart. Something Dooku appreciated about his student was the fact that he saw his midichlorian count as a distraction. Plo, just as Dooku, understood that a midi count didn't mean anything. Plo was higher than the average Jedi with a count close to 13,000. Dooku's was close to 16,500, and obviously Yoda was 17,700. But none of these mindless counts meant anything. In reality, the Jedi used them as a gauge, but anyone could become a Jedi. It was just a matter of how much time they put into it. As the very first Jedi expressed, the Force was like learning a martial art. Anyone could do it, but not everyone had the determination. Some people were naturally gifted, others would have to work harder, and because individuals like Yoda, Dooku, and Plo were naturally gifted, they could decide to slack off and take their time with their growth. But just like the two masters above him in the Jedi lineage, Plo didn't. He worked hard and his master did too. About 3 years into their training when Plo was 13 years old, he felt the Force call out to him while they were on a mission at Naboo. The mission was a bit different than the typical mission, and it was one that Dooku loathed. He was tracking down someone who had been stealing from an upper-class patriarch. Dooku didn't like them, because just like the Republic, they were becoming more corrupt. But Plo, despite agreeing with his master, having been influenced by him over the years, found a connection to the Force on Naboo. It wasn't the patriarch, it wasn't anyone in his family either. It was a neighbor of his family. Plo, once he had a moment to speak, whispered it into his master's ear, and the two of them made their way for House Palpatine. After a long conversation, one that relied on Palpatine's mother to turn the tide of, Dooku and Plo brought the 1-year-old Sheev Palpatine back to Coruscant. Dooku, after checking Palpatine's count, believed that the boy was the one meant to bring balance to the Force. His count was 20,000, which was higher than Yoda's. It was astronomical. They couldn't believe it. This left Yoda in another bind. He didn't want to train another student, but now it felt like he didn't necessarily have a choice in the matter. It would be decided in the following years if Yoda wanted to or not. After all, Sheev at this moment was an infant. Dooku was proud of Plo for his work in finding young Sheev. There was no saying in how long it would have taken the Jedi to find him, if at all, considering Naboo was a relatively dormant world with no issues that required Jedi interference. Plus, Naboo was pretty close to the edge of the Mid-Rim, and the Jedi didn't go beyond that. The following years would include Plo's growth as a Jedi thanks to his master. A weird combination within young Plo was the fact that the Jedi Padawan was a mix of unhinged and Keldor. Not that Plo was bouncing off the walls like an erratic loth cat. It was more so the fact that Plo was becoming outspoken like his instructor. He knew how to levy his opinions, and he was very smart in the political atmosphere. Plo could see it now, and if he had been taught by a more domesticated or dogmatic Jedi, he likely would have been part of the problem. Though what aided Plo the most, which differentiated him from his master, was the fact that he was a Keldor. He could be a lot more patient and quiet than Dooku could. Sometimes his master would jump at something too soon. He'd become frustrated and even a bit unstoppable. It wasn't pleasant when Dooku had these flare-ups, and Plo was very good at addressing these situations with his master. It made the two of them better for each other. They were able to be the best of both worlds. Dooku could have disagreements with the direction of the Republic or the Jedi, and Plo would agree but address it in a more diplomatic way. Plo was a true Jedi, one who was in the light because it was there. At this point in his career, Dooku was becoming chaotic good, but that chaos could very easily be turned into destructive or even evil chaos. This was something that Plo didn't want for his instructor, and towards the latter part of his training, Plo became adamant that Dooku learn to see the change in the galaxy and address it with a calm mind. There was even an event that transpired on Eridu where Dooku lost his cool and almost pulled a lightsaber on a public official. If it wasn't for the then in his life 18-year-old Plo Koon, then the Jedi would have been in serious trouble. Plo and Dooku balanced each other out, and because of the issues Plo was having with Dooku's outbursts and the change within the Republic and Jedi, he started his own research. The best part about overachievers like Plo is he could provide the insight that Dooku may have not seen. However, their road as master and apprentice was coming to a close. But before it did, Plo very strongly suggested that his master become a member on the High Council if he was offered that. Dooku didn't see why. He was becoming more and more disgruntled with the complacency of the Jedi Council, and on top of that, his master. Yoda was more complacent than ever before, and the Jedi were hurting because of it. Plo could see where Dooku was coming from, truthfully he could, but being mad at the Jedi and not offering solutions was counterproductive. Dooku talked a great game. He had great thoughts and ideas about the Order, but instead of presenting them in a format the Jedi Council needed, he went in with fury. It was hard because a lot of times Plo was present too. But because Dooku greatly appreciated Plo and respected him, and believed he was ready, they proceeded forward with the knighting ceremony when Plo was 23 years old. In the same year of 69 BBY, Dooku would become a Jedi Master on the High Council. It was also at this point when young Sheev Palpatine would finally be ready to become a Jedi Padawan. His midichlorian count may have been high, and he definitely worked hard, but he struggled a lot within the Order. He had a very dark nature about him, but the influence of the Jedi and their direct care and adoration of him helped him get here to this point where he could get rid of it mostly. He just took a little longer than usual to get to this point, where the instructors believed that he was ready to become a Padawan. Dooku was a little eager to take on another student, and Palpatine would be the perfect continuation of the legacy, but he decided against it. Truthfully, Yoda was considering it, and they all believed that Palpatine was the chosen one. But Yoda too decided against it. This was due to a new addition of Dooku on the Council, and all the ideas he was spewing out at the Council members. Instead came along the young Keldor Jedi Knight, Plo Koon. His eagerness to continue his Jedi journey led him to deciding to select young Palpatine as his first student. At 23 years old, this was a risk, one that the Jedi Council itself would monitor. Their intentions on having the trained-from-birth student become a success was obviously a focal point for them, but allowing a Keldor like Plo handle the training of Sheev was risky. The two of them began their dynamic a little rocky. Plo was much calmer and collected, while Sheev was a more energetic version of Dooku with a keen sense for unnatural abilities. As Master and Apprentice began their journey, Dooku watched his student's eagerness turn to anxiety, as it slowly fleshed itself out as serenity. Plo would use his natural gifts to his advantage. When it came to a student like Sheev, he would need to be the best version of himself, which was not perfection, rather patient. Plo would orchestrate things in a way different from his master, because as was understood between masters and apprentices, is that not everything would be the same. Plo would take the best of what his master taught him, and then he would do what he could with it with Sheev. So instead of going right out to the field, Plo and Sheev spent time inside the Jedi Temple, studying with each other. These weren't traditional studies, rather techniques that the Barrandov sages used to bond with each other. On their homeworld, they fought off massive storms and anomalies to protect their people. Their home planet was a vile place, one where only the strongest could survive. Thanks to the Barrandov, and their unity with each other, they are able to fight off these storms and defend their people. Plo would use these same techniques to further the bond between he and Sheev. It'd be imperative for their dynamic with one another. This would be through a series of meditations and trips to Force-sensitive planets around the galaxy, one of them being Tython. As Plo learned through his extensive personal studies, the Seeing Stone on Tython could be used as a pathway to enter a more diverse field of the Force, harmonizing not just with other Jedi, but the Force itself. It could be used as a release to letting go of dark attributes as well, which Plo wanted to help Palpatine with. When they arrived on Tython, the meditation would begin. Plo would allow his student to go first, and Plo would sit on the other side of the henge, connecting himself to the Force. As it began, Plo realized that perhaps there was more darkness looming within his student. He couldn't help but notice that Palpatine was drawn to the darkness, little of which existed on Tython. His training as a Jedi helped him let go of many of these feelings. However, the dark side was strong, and its pull even more so. Palpatine called out into the Force, but with Plo beside him, using the Force as a guide, he would help ease Palpatine away from the darkness. In this moment, a bond was created between Plo and his student. She rolled off the Seeing Stone, and his master caught him. Palpatine looked up and asked what happened, and Plo just told him that it would be explained later. As Plo did during his time as a student, he very quickly got to work on journaling down the information from today's session. He would reflect on these details in the future. There was one thing that he needed to focus on. While it was evident that the bond had been established between master and apprentice, there was a shadow lurking. Plo wasn't sure what it was, but it felt like the shadow of a Sith. They were still around, but somehow not. Plo couldn't really understand it, and so he called out to Sifo Dyas. Master Lena Kastana and her student, Sifo Dyas, would come to Tython to accompany the young Keltor Jedi. Even though Sifo Dyas and Dooku were the same age, he elected to stay with his master for an extended period of time. The two of them were nearly inseparable, and Master Kastana supported the position that her student held. When they got to Tython, they looked over the notes handed out by Plo Koon, and they themselves attempted to connect to the Seeing Stone. They repeated the same process, Sifo on the stone with Lena in the corner of the henge. It produced nothing. Plo quietly watched over the situation. He could sense that nothing was coming from the Seeing Stone, so he turned over to his student who was sleeping, with his hand holding a cloth under his head and leaning against a rock. Plo reached out with one hand towards the student and the other hand towards Sifo and Lena inside the Seeing Stone henge, and felt through the Force, almost using Palpatine as a gateway in. Plo didn't expect much from this, but when he connected to Palpatine, he felt a surge of darkness. When that was transferred to Sifo Dyas, he was transported to a world he did not know. It was so dark and eerie. There were two figures walking in the distance, both of which with their hoods over their heads. It was almost as if all four Jedi were present on the world. As they watched, lightning flashed from the ground and a hiss, and the figures vanished. Their own vision didn't end though. Their eyes gazed over a multitude of platforms in the air, the soft touch of snow sprinkling down on top of them. The Jedi could feel the same darkness, and the two figures were all the more present. Before the Jedi or Sith could react, the four Jedi were ripped from the Seeing Stone. The Force created a wave of force that knocked Sifo Dyas from the stone, threw Lena into a henge, sent Plo down the hill, and shoved Palpatine further into the stone he was lying on. Across the galaxy, the two Sith were in their lair, standing by an altar, and they were thrown into the walls. The Sith altar destroyed by the beacon of light that emanated from the Jedi. When the four Jedi converged again, they discussed what happened, but Plo realized something. The darkness didn't sprout from the Seeing Stone. It came from Palpatine. There was a darkness lurking within him, but it wasn't Palpatine's darkness. Every sentient has the capability to grow into evil, but most don't. There was a larger amount of this within Sheev, and he was being pulled to it. He wasn't going down the dark path per se, but some unknown force from either the Dark Planet or Megiddo was doing it. Plo didn't know how to handle the situation, so he approached Lene and got in a call with his former teacher asking what should be done. Dooku expressed that the four of them should come to the council, and so they did. When they eventually presented the evidence, Dooku took a stand, having the time to prepare for this moment. He told the council that they should investigate Megiddo, though a number of Jedi believed that that wouldn't be necessary. Dooku stood up, dismissing not just his student but the four present Jedi, so he could talk to the council. He demanded that the council do something, if anything, at least give a chance to believe there was some evil out there. He spoke with ferocity but dedication. He wanted to save the Order and the Republic. He hadn't fallen from the path yet, and he believed that the Jedi were to continue neglecting themselves, then they would give way for an evil force to take them down. He didn't want for that to happen, so he suggested and firmly believed that if the Jedi neglected this issue, it could blow up in their faces. He said that while there was no confirmation of the Sith, they needed to be willing to accept the fact that an evil enemy could return. If Palpatine was indeed the chosen one, then him being brought into the galaxy was not a coincidence. He was brought because there was a darkness that the Jedi were too complacent to see. He requested that the council stop neglecting the facts and attempt to do something. The rousing speech got the attention of the council.
Switching to Shopify helps you sell smarter at every stage of your
Come
business.
on.
Take full control of your brand with your own.
Do something. The rousing speech got the attention of the council, though some of its oldest members were having a difficult time seeing eye to eye with Dooku. These came from Yarael Poof, Oberyn Cesis, and even Dooku's master, Yoda. Though with Master Eula Braylon, who hadn't been forced from the council, her child having not been born yet, and new master to the council, Polly Departium, Dooku was able to rally support. On top of the support from Eula and Polly, Yaddle, Terra Nube, and Jocasta Nu threw their names to his side. Due to the rallying behind Dooku, Yoda decided that a collection of Jedi should go to Megiddo, though the young Sheev Palpatine would be a judgment call from his master. If the threat was too strong, as Dooku suggested, he would go himself. So, a collection of Jedi would move for Megiddo, taking a Paladin-class Corvette. The Jedi going were Yoda, Dooku, Lene Kistana, Saifa Diaz, Plo Koon, Sheev Palpatine, and new council member Ki-Adi-Mundi. Plo decided that Palpatine needed to be a part of this move. If he was the chosen one, then he needed to be present. The Jedi would scour the planet for days, but at night, finally, Plo decided to try something different. He wasn't able to sleep much on Megiddo anyways. They were sleeping inside the Paladin Corvette, but he just felt the rising darkness. It wasn't just from the potential Sith, but it also came from Dooku and Palpatine. It was hard to handle and it made him feel uneasy. Was he meant to fall down this same path? He didn't want to, so he tried to resist it. And in doing so, he went into Palpatine's mind while he slept. Plo could see everything he loved being destroyed, but what was most apparent to Plo is that Palpatine's heart hadn't been changed. There was so much light left in his student's heart, and he was so capable of being saved before the Sith could drag him down. Plo focused on his student, feeling the Force and then hiding his own essence as if it was Palpatine's. Plo then reached out, getting a hold of Yoda's essence and connecting it, which quietly woke up the Grand Master. As Plo did this, both he and Yoda followed the scent into the facilities where the Sith were pulling him, and in using the last little bit of strength he had, Plo used Palpatine's voice to hide under, and he told the Sith that he would come to them. Yoda jolted from his sleep and watched Plo slip to his knees and hold himself up, keeping quiet as he could as he lost control and fainted to the ground. Yoda felt and saw everything Plo saw, and now he realized it wasn't a dream. It was a work of Plo to connect the Sith and Palpatine to Yoda, so he and the others could finish their task. Quickly and quietly, the other Jedi got themselves together and left Palpatine and Plo in the care of Professor Yang. The old Jedi droid just picked Plo up and placed him on a medical table. He'd be alright, but his energy, especially due to his young age and lack of sleep, put him out, and resulted in him being knocked out. Yoda led Dooku, Lene, Sifo, and Mundi across the snow. He connected to the Sith through the vision, and used it as a guide to their lair. The Sith were expecting young Palpatine to walk into their facility. They continued prying on his mind. It was a little more quiet than it was before, but they assumed that he was just trying not to wake up the other Jedi, and they weren't wrong for thinking that that was the case. Their intention was for Palpatine to kill the Jedi in their sleep and then become one of them. In the shadows, outside the Paladin, Tenebros's hidden and secretive student, Venomous, was waiting to strike. He could hear movement, so he assumed that Palpatine was preparing to move. Venomous missed the cue from his master, which is why he never saw the Jedi leave. But he was hearing movement. That was just Professor Yang. The Jedi snuck into the lair of the Sith, and quickly without hesitation, they, like the Jedi of old, marched in and ignited their weapons. They were prepared to end this, even if it meant doing so in a non-Jedi way. Tenebros and Plagueis were confused, the Sith Lord assuming Venomous alerted the Jedi to their position. But that wasn't true. They had just been duped by a Keldor Jedi using his bond with a student to expose them. Tenebros and Plagueis prepared for combat, igniting their weapons and engaging. They were outmanned, but it was about skill. The 5 Jedi moved in, their speed matching that of the evil Sith. Tenebros only used 1 blade, and Plagueis used 2, cutting and slashing wherever he could, defending himself with all of his strength. He was able to throw Sifo back, and then defend from Lene before striking down Ki-Adi-Mundi. Dooku and Yoda worked as a master-apprentice duo, using their years of time together to fight the Sith Lord. Dooku was so experienced, but with Mundi dropping, and Master Kistana fighting by herself, he needed to help. He slipped away and countered Plagueis, which caught him off guard. Due to Palpatine being connected to the Sith altar subconsciously, he woke up when the sound of lightsabers echoed out across his ears. He jumped up and ran forward, slipping on the metal ground and grabbing his blade. Huyang could hear him and he tried to stop him, but he couldn't. Palpatine ran out of the ship and slid in the snow. A slip that saved his life. Venomous, not really understanding that Palpatine was the one they weren't supposed to kill, tried to kill him. Because Palpatine was struck down by the snow, he survived. but he quickly regained his strength, igniting a blue lightsaber and swinging upwards. Even though Palpatine was 15, he was incredibly talented, and in his short time with Plo and even Dooku, he learned a lot. Venom is blocked as he was thrown back, the snow underneath their feet providing an extra disadvantage or advantage to the battlefield. Being so young, Palpatine should be easy to kill, and he knew that. But he had no intention of dying today. Their blades clashed again. Inside the lair, Sifo Dyas was back on his feet, after Lenne had been forced backwards. Plagueis was able to capitalize off the youth of Dooku and Sifo, pulling them in and parrying them so hard, it knocked them both in their feet. He turned over to see Tenebras falling victim to Yoda. The little green Grand Master of the Jedi Order was unbeatable. Plagueis bid him farewell as the emerald blade was driven through his master's stomach and pulled upwards. Plagueis quickly defended another attack, thrusting a blade into Sifo Dyas before ripping it out and cutting down Lenne Castana. He used the Force against Dooku, which threw him from his feet, but in a fit of rage, he used all of his strength to whip his lightsaber across the room, which cut Plagueis' legs into pieces, and then, using the Force, he guided the weapon into the Sith's face. Yoda just looked over with shame. 3 Jedi gone, and one of them already so much less of a Jedi in the fashion he killed the Sith Lord. On the landing platform, Palpatine and Venomous were fighting back and forth, neither of them realizing that the Sith were gone, and Palpatine not understanding that a victory here would bring balance to the Force. They toiled, the young Jedi warrior using everything he learned and everything his master taught him. Inside the Corvette, Huyang prepared to help, but Plo's hand rose over his shoulder. The Jedi Master would finish this fight. He was a bit loopy, but that didn't matter. He moved out of the vessel and ignited his weapon, a move that took Venomous's attention away from Palpatine. He was confused as he was kicked backwards by Palpatine, and in one fell swoop, Plo decapitated him, though the swing almost forced him off the platform to his death. If it wasn't for Palpatine catching him and pulling him back over into the snow, he would have died. The Jedi had won, and while Sifo Dyas would die in Dooku's arms, Dooku at least had a final moment with his best friend before he became one with the Force. The death of the Sith would be instrumental in helping the Republic. The Sith had been using their influence and their wealth to further the corruption of the galaxy, and if Plagueis or Tenebras continued, they could have furthered the Republic into a corrupt state of suffering. There were issues that would eventually arise from the tension created by the Republic, but nothing large enough to ever start a war. Within months after the death of the Sith, Councilmember Dooku would take on Qui-Gon Jinn as an apprentice, while he would watch his former student continue training the boy who turned out to be the chosen one. Without the Sith, Palpatine was able to find himself happiness and peace within the light, and thanks to his instructor, he could harmonize with the Force unlike anyone else. Plo's completion of Palpatine would see him joining the High Council eventually, following in the footsteps of Dooku. Palpatine would end up training Mace Windu, and the legacy of Dooku would extend from Qui-Gon to Obi-Wan in the following years. The corruption of the Republic would be foiled out, thanks to the mindset of the newer Jedi. Ones like Plo and Dooku who had ideals that were befitting of a modern order. Plo was the balance to Dooku's ideas, and very soon, the council would be filled to the brim with Jedi that descended from Dooku's lineage. It wasn't biased either, they were simply the best of the order. Mace Windu became a knight at 19, and then he himself ascended to the council before the age of 25. Palpatine, due to bringing balance to the Force and his extraordinary work in instructing Windu, would too become a council member at a young age. By the time Yoda stepped down from the High Council, the lineage of Yoda and Dooku filled most of the ranks. Dooku being the eldest of the bunch, with Plo Koon, Qui-Gon, Palpatine, Windu, Depa Billaba, and Obi-Wan filling each of the corresponding roles of the Council. Their effect on the Jedi helped it become the shining example of justice in the galaxy. Before the end of his life, Dooku and Plo would find the secrets to Exegol, a place Plo, Palpatine, Sifo, and Lenne visited on Tython. When they arrived, it confirmed the Sith were gone, and the Force and the galaxy had found their peace. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to our patrons, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliand, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewo 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sith Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Only 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, 46 Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lieutenant Wing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon, all the stuff below. Otherwise, let's talk about the story. I thought pairing up Plo and Dooku would be very interesting. Plo is very old in Keldor years, but he hasn't made an appearance in High Republic, and so I'm going to assume Keldor years are the opposite of like Yoda species years, where it's like less than a human year. Another thing is that Plo didn't really become a Jedi Knight until like 10 years before Phantom Menace, so I wanted to move that process forward a little bit. he's probably around the 70, 80-year-old age range. But the whole idea of this video is kind of confronting the fact that even though we all love Plo Koon, and I do too, he's technically part of the problem. You know, he doesn't speak out during Revenge of the Sith. He's not someone that says, well, maybe we should do something about what 5 said about the inhibitor chips. Like, he is technically part of the problem. And so the idea that I wanted to challenge here is him not technically being a part of said problem. And I thought that was kind of fun to do, especially with Dooku being his master and him kind of balancing Dooku out in a way that Qui-Gon would later do in both this story and canon. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.
Watch some of that. Yep. Hang on. Watch some of that. So yeah. Tell me in the description below as always. And then subscribe, like, and share. I'd like to see more of these reaction videos in the future as well. Bye for now. I'll see you guys next time.